again, I lift my hat to the city because they realized that it's not the city building the city, it's developers building the city. So they included the developers into this process. And what was shared with me after I mentioned some of the difficulties due to the constraints that were imposed by the city was, Excel, you're not the first one to tell us this. We've learned over the last couple of months. We are willing to make some changes.
Have you been thinking about buying your first rental property for some time, or do you already own a bunch of properties? Well, fellow investors, you found the right location to listen and learn from others' successes. Welcome to The Very Real Estate Effect with your host, Axel Monsaingeon.
Hello, and welcome back to the Very Real Estate Effect podcast, a show dedicated to real estate investing right here in Quebec. Today, it's a pleasure and an honor to give you an update on a project I'm working on, the development in Saint-Jérôme, and also to talk a little bit about density and what I see going on right now. So before I get into it, just want to remind you, share this episode with a friend who could benefit from this conversation, as I'm going to be sharing a lot about development. So for those who haven't listened to this podcast before and who've been hiding under a rock, well, first of all, go back 212 episodes and listen to everything since the beginning. And then if you don't, well, about 2 years ago, I acquired some land in the city of Saint-Jérôme to develop, at the time, a 16-unit residential units and 3,000 square feet of commercial space. Now, over time, that project grew, and I've been sharing the journey since 2 years on this podcast. It hasn't always been easy, but it's been extremely rewarding in some ways. And so, again, if this is your first time listening, I'll summarize the situation. So I bought an approved project for 16 units on 2 pieces of land. I went and got my building permit. It took me 8 months. And once I got my permit, the city came back and said, hey, we're going to change the zoning downtown. If you want more density, you could probably get it. And then at the same time, my neighbor came to see me and said, hey, I'd be open to selling my parking lot. So her property was a parking lot with a commercial triplex. And so we put it under contract. We closed. And so now we own all 3 pieces of land. Now I went back to the city and said, hey, we're across the street from the university, UQO, Université du Québec en Outaouais. There's a cégep not too far. We're 350 meters away from the train station, downtown location. Like this is a good location. Now, the project evolved. I'm an immigrant here, and it may not sound like it, but if I speak French, you'll understand why. I love to contribute some student housing. It's been one of my goals. I would love to do that. It's just it has to make sense. The project incorporating student housing has to make sense. So I had approached the university across the street and took a lot of time. They said they'd be really interested. They'd love to get some student housing. They couldn't commit because they have laws, regulations for mandate attributions and partnerships, except there's no other land across the streets. So I decided to go fully residential. So we redesigned 43 units residential over 6 floors with 7,000 square feet of commercial space and an underground parking for 19 spots. This was a very lengthy, difficult process. We were under a fair amount of pressure to resubmit quickly by the city. So we worked really hard with the architectural team, and we resubmitted back in March of 2024. We went through CCU. So for those who don't know, CCU is in French, Comité Consultatif d'Urbanisme. It's the committee of the city that meets to see requests that don't fit the current zoning that the city is still interested in and whether they should approve it or not. So we went through CCU, and we went through the city approval. We were approved in June, and then we actually got our official written resolution in August. So right there is basically a 6 months process. Once we had that, great, I know what I can do. I'm very proud to have added a lot of density to the project. Originally it was 3 floors. Now we're at 6 floors, and we went from 16 to 43 units. Great news. However, the city had imposed a full ground floor of commercial space. There was some parking constraints. There was height constraints. Now, the new zoning calls for 8 to 10 floors downtown, but they said because you're by the river, you're only going to get 6 floors. I had originally submitted for 8 because they told me they wouldn't give me 10. So, anyways, long story short, to say that I was having a tough time finding partners to come in the project with me, because there is a positive return on the project. Is just not as much as what the industry wants right now. And let's also be very open that the interest rate decreases of the last couple of months have been very helpful. Just like any other developer, just like any other real estate investor, when the price of capital goes down, project value go up. So that's important to remind everyone. And the lower the interest rates, the more capital, the more the bigger the loan, basically, the property can support. Therefore, the more we can finance. Now, with the APH Select, we can go up to 95% of the project cost, which is really good. We already have basically enough equity in the deal to be able to make this happen. It's just that we need to qualify a project that qualifies for that kind of financing. So long story short, since I've been working on this for the last 2 years, I've also built a little bit of a relationship with the various people involved in the project on the city side. And back in end of August, beginning of September, I reached out to say, look, I'm working on the project. It's moving forward. Oh yeah, because I forgot to mention that the city, now that they've approved the project, they're putting pressure on me to start the project within a year. I'd love to start building within a year. It's just that in order to do this, I need to do my construction plans. I need to get my building permits and construction plans. Well, plans for permit also entail all of the engineering. So let me break down that process for you. Once you get your site approval, which are plans that are fairly general, it's just like, what is it going to look like? How tall? How big? What kind of volume? How many units? You don't need to go into that much detail about really anything other than the facades and the envelope of the building. So that's what you submit. It's still a very lengthy and costly document and plan to be prepared by an architect, but you don't have to go into that much detail. Once your project is approved and you have your site approval, then you go for your plans for permit. So that's when you drill down into more detail in order to produce plans that the city can take to make sure it respects all of their requirements and their rules. So obviously the inside, the outside, and you also need to supply all of the engineering. So at a high level engineering, not to the grimy details of construction. Once you have your permit, in parallel or after, you work on your construction plans. So the construction plans is the set of plans with the highest level of detail that the builder actually needs to be able to, one, go out for bid and go out for quotes, right? So they get all of the areas, all the volume, all the surfaces, and they say it's going to take this much concrete, it's going to take this much, flooring, it's going to take this much, this many windows, that quantity of that size, and so on and so forth. So then they can dispatch and they can go to market. So then they go to 5 window suppliers and they say, hey, I need 150 windows of these sizes. Give me a price. Same thing for the concrete, same thing for the coffrage, for excavation, plumbing, electricity, roofing, outside revêtement, so the siding, you name it. So the city is pushing me to go to permit. I'd love to. It's just, it takes couple $100,000 that I don't have right now. In order to attract that capital, I need to have a good project that produces enough returns to be able to get capital. Chicken and the egg, right? So the project currently produces positive returns, but it's a bit low. It's just in the high tens. It was around 12, to be fully transparent, around 11, 12. And that doesn't attract enough capital. It's not sexy enough. It's not good enough in terms of returns. And so I asked for a meeting with the city and I explained the situation. And so I had some fairly high level people over there, which I won't name to protect them. And I explained the situation that I was in. And literally after a couple of minutes of sharing, like, okay, there's too much commercial space right now. Commercial, 7,000 square feet of commercial on the ground floor is a massive impediment because there's too much commercial space out there. It's hard to rent, so it's not attracting. We had some parking issues. We had some materials like the city requires for you to have an entire brick facade. Now the price of brick has skyrocketed, and due to some, I was going to say, building situation, um, it was a lot more expensive because we needed to do some fairly heavy structural work to be able to transfer loads on the structural. So we had a ground floor, and then at the first floor we were backing up about 6 feet. But then this was where the brick was starting. Therefore, the weight of the brick had to rest on something. So that meant an extra concrete beam inside, an um, extra pillars to be able to do those load transfers, and so on and so forth. So I had sat down with other developers more experienced than me, and the feedback kept being the same. That's why I asked for this meeting at the city, and I explained to them the situation. And literally, after a couple minutes of hearing me out, I was like, "Look, let's just hold right here. The city is going through some massive changes, and they've done a lot of work. And I lift my hat, kudos to the amount of work that they've been doing to redo all of the zoning, to redo le plan d'urbanisme. It's a massive job that needed to be done because that city is going through a lot of growth, a lot of expansion, and the zoning from 25 years ago is just not appropriate now. Most of the downtown is zoned like 2 or 3 floors. It's ridiculous. Now there's like 6-story buildings. So in order to ease and speed up this process, they need to redo all of their zoning. So that's what they're in the process of doing. And throughout that process, they had invited some industry professionals like myself to be able to pitch ideas, contribute, and give our vision and share our constraints for this to happen. And again, I lift my hat to the city because they realize that it's not the city building the city, it's developers building the city. So they included the developers into this process. And what was shared with me after I mentioned some of the difficulties due to the constraints that were imposed by the city was, Excel, you're not the first one to tell us this. We've learned over the last couple of months. Um, we are willing to make some changes. Now, we can't tell you what yet until the final zoning essentially gets published in 2025, but everything that you've mentioned is going to come back and be a lot more flexible. Yes, they'd like some commercial space on the ground floor. It doesn't have to be the entire floor. So the city realizes that the zoning needs to change, that they need to give more density. And in order to do this, that, for example, the commercial space that was required on the ground floor is going to have to be reduced. Now, we also need more parking. We're looking to do now 2 floors of underground parking, but one really underground floor and the rest of the parking at surface level behind a small commercial facade. So there's ways to work the project. And they said, even, hey, even the brick, it may not be mandatory anymore. And who knows, you want more density? Maybe you're going to be able to add 2 floors. Those are all excellent news. It's just that, well, I'm going to have to restart some of the design, some of the architecture for this project. So on one side, I left this project extremely excited and in some ways discouraged. But as I've shared before, my extreme enthusiasm for this always takes me to the positive side, and I want to keep going. Now, this project has been challenging for anyone looking to get into development. You better be ready because it takes more time, it takes more capital than anything you can budget and think of. Now, I got in a situation where I started all of this at the beginning of the cycle of the city changing and zoning, and just that is an 18-month process. So I need to wait and come out on the other side to be able to have the new data. But essentially, I bought land to do a 16 unit, and I may end up with a 70 unit building. So for 16, 1 6 to 70, 70. Took me 2.5 years. Is it worth it? I think so. Have I gotten more white hair? Absolutely. Is this what I've learned from this? Is you got to be patient. And most importantly, as difficult as it is, you got to work with the city, because the more you work with them, the more you understand their vision, the better you can design and the more you can plan. And lastly, you have to have a good team around you. I've shared it before, a good architect, urbanist, engineering, everything it takes to be able to get this to approval. So this is my update on the project. So yeah, the project was for sale. It's still maybe for sale. It's just that now it's giving me such a good kick in the butt to get this done. Now, the second thing I want to share with you is that the city has mentioned how much they need some affordable housing and how much they need some student housing. So I'm kind of going back in that avenue, and I've actually met with the director of the local CEGEP. I've been in touch with the university to see what we can do, and I'm willing to do some student housing. It's just that it can't be at my cost. I want to contribute. It's just I can't be the one paying for it because I've already been paying for all this for the last 2.5 years. So that outlines to me the kind of the level of disconnect. You have an educational institution with thousands of students who won't commit to having a building built for them. To me, there's a problem. There's a lack of vision, but that's just my 2 cents on it. Now, I will continue working on this project. I will continue to share in full transparency what's happening with the project because it hasn't been easy. It's kept me from sleeping at night. It's better now. It's much better now, but it hasn't been easy. And I look forward to the moment where I get to walk on my concrete slab. And you know what? I'll keep sharing on the podcast. And why not? Some of you can just join us at the inauguration and we can have a glass of champagne together. Until that day comes, keep listening to the podcast, keep researching your market, get real estate education. And I'll do another episode about that soon. Okay. Thank you very much. Have a wonderful day. I'll talk to you next week. Ciao.